From east to S to nine.
Neighbor complaints double. People are spending more time at home than ever before. They have gotten to really know their neighbors. Without the paint and assisted living. All the laughs, all the heart.
From
24/7.
east to S to nine.
What? Are you completely out of your...
Cheesiness. The Cheetos. That's really they're attractive and you ain't gotta do shit because of it. Women don't like that label because they want to be seen as something more human, not just piece of meat, but some women like that title.
You can't say that about many people, but you could say that about Babbage.
Charles Babbage represented that extraordinary element of British society, the scientist aristocrat. Many were known for their eccentricities, and Babbage was no exception. As a youth, Babbage devised footwear of hinged boards intended to allow him to walk on water. Never one to shirk adventure, he tried them out himself, but flipped over and nearly drowned. Babbage demonstrated his brilliance in mathematics while attending Trinity College in Cambridge. In 1820, Babbage was checking the accuracy of calculations made for the Royal Astronomical Society and kept finding errors. He reasoned that a machine could be constructed that would calculate the tables and directly print the results. He called the machine the difference engine. He drew up plans for a section of the device and had it built with his own funds in 1822. Babbage couldn't pay for the construction of the entire device, but since the greatest beneficiaries would be the British government and people, he made the extraordinary step of petitioning the government for a grant. In 1823, the Treasury provided the project with startup funds.
Government support for the computer industry is nothing new. It's very much a big topic in the news today, and it will continue to be. Computing is an expensive proposition, and it usually requires some government support if it's going to get anywhere.
Babbage hired a mechanical engineer, set to work on a complete design for the difference engine, and immediately ran into difficulties. The mechanical machine shops of the time were not advanced enough to produce parts in the precise measurements that Babbage's plans required. So Babbage designed better machine tools which would eventually improve the entire state of British tool manufacturing. By 1829, Babbage had spent the £1,500 grant from the government, and even more than that from his own funds. But only a few bits and pieces of machine had been completed. Babbage's project began to attract critics.
He was plagued by several problems. One of his problems being his perfectionism, another problem being that his work was not understood or appreciated by the people of his time.
Babbage had many enemies. Even London's organ grinders despised him because he had tried to have them banned as their music interfered with his thinking. But the inventor continued to toil, and finally in 1832 there were enough parts to assemble a section of the engine. It functioned perfectly, solving equations and producing 6-digit results. But it was only a small part of the proposed machine. The skyrocketing costs and lack of results finally made the government pull its support from the project. Although disappointed by the cancellation, Babbage had contributed to the project's demise by suggesting that a new device he had conceived, the analytical engine, would be vastly superior to his old design.
That's how weak my bones are.
In hindsight, probably should have finished the difference seen how far he could have gone with
They're
that
clean.
before starting the analytical
There are
engine.
no
There's no
teeth.
question that the analytical engine
Oh, this
was
one that fell out.
more than he could handle.
Babbage was obsessed with his new idea. With the analytical engine, Babbage asked himself, why not build a machine that could solve any mathematical problem? At the age of 43, Babbage had the vision of a computer, a vision he pursued for the rest of his life. The extraordinary fact is that Babbage's overall design for the analytical engine had many components analogous to those in a modern computer. The heart of the machine, the mill, made the calculations, like the central processing unit of modern computers. An oblong structure, the store, held numbers to be used in the calculations like modern computer memory. Instructions and numbers could be fed into the machine using punch cards. Much of what we know about the workings of the analytical engine came from the writings of Ada, Countess of Lovelace.
Among the people who understood what Babbage was doing was a woman named Ada Augusta, who was the daughter of one of the daughters of Lord Byron, the poet. She studied mathematics as a child and had quite a bit of talent.
Ada met Babbage at one of his famous dinner parties that were often attended by the luminaries of British science and engineering. Babbage demonstrated the working section of the difference engine for her, and she was immediately captivated by it. She published a simple description of Babbage's vision for the analytical engine.
Ada wrote some descriptions of it, and she also appended to these descriptions a hypothetical way that this machine could solve an equation. And on the basis of those descriptions, people often call her the world's first programmer.
But she was never to program a real machine. As Babbage entered the last years of his life, his great work was unfinished. He had become cranky and suffered constant attack by his many enemies. In 1871, when London's organ grinders discovered that Babbage was ill, they surrounded his house and serenaded him, increasing his agony until he died. Only a small portion of the analytical engine was built in Babbage's lifetime. Babbage's vision of the computer fell into obscurity. Except for the detailed texts left by Ada, could well have been forgotten.
Babbage's machines, which were never finished, which existed for the most part only on paper, were proto-computers. They were mechanical, they used gears, they used metal shafts. They weren't computers in our sense of the term, that is, they weren't electronic digital computers, but they were abstractly and on paper mechanical computers.
It would be nearly 100 years before a programmable computation device would again be conceived. Babbage predicted it would take just 3 years to complete the difference engine. It actually took him 14.
It is our job to take you where others won't. Born ready. On America says, I don't like blank on my sandwich. When you fill in the blank, ketchup, pickle, onion, mustard, mayonnaise. Oh! You take your team to the bank.
Fabulous. Black hat.
Join host Karen Michael Higgins for America Says. Watch full episodes on Game Show Central.
My name is Madonna. It's Anne Hathaway. And I'm Rebel Wilson.
So many great guests, great stories, and some of my very favorite people. Say what now? So you hear that every day. I left sad and this poor girl could. You Jon Snow?
It's my turn.
This could be another party. We've got a cake and we're all together. That's true. Show business is tough. Join me on the Grey Watch Hotel for a non-stop classic going. Your one-stop ship. For sharks and little sharks has arrived. From engineering disasters, epic fails, and all of a sudden, boom. To mega moves, giant flips.
This move that we'll do, and we only
Jump,
have
jump!
chance to do it right.
From ancient ingenuity, Sakara bird is definitely the first step on the way to the understanding of aerodynamics. To futuristic intelligence,
This will evolve for generations.
see how exploration of the past powers the technology of the future. Modern Innovations by the History Channel.
In the second half of the 19th century, America's population increased 35% each decade. America's exploding population began to endanger one of its great institutions, the American census.
The census, which is required by the Constitution to be held every 10 years, was still being done by old-fashioned people with making check marks on pieces of paper, and it simply couldn't keep up with the tremendous surge of population in the U.S.
The crisis reached a head in 1887. The Census Bureau was still hand-tallying the data from the 1880 census. Desperate for relief, the Bureau pleaded for any method that could speed up the counting of the 1890 census. The superintendent of the census had proposals for 3 systems, so he decided to stage a contest. 2 of the systems relied on hand counting. The third, developed by a young, rather humorless former MIT instructor named Herman Hollerith, used punched cards. Punch cards would one day become the standard method of feeding high volumes of data into computers.
Now, where he got this idea, we are not sure. He may have been inspired by the fact that a conductor on a railroad punches your ticket when you hand it to him.
Hollerith's system beat the others easily. In the tabulation portion of the test, it was nearly 10 times faster. The Census Bureau leased 56 of Hollerith's machines at $1,000 a year each and put them to work in July 1890. Census Bureau clerks used Hollerith's machines to punch the cards and then tabulate the results. Scores of operators were trained to use the puncher quickly and accurately. The tabulating was done with electricity. A metal pin that passed through a card hole made electrical contact with a cup of mercury, completing a circuit that was registered on a tallying device that consisted of rows of clock-like dials. Hollerith's machines were a step toward the later development of computers. They significantly sped up the processing of information. The results of the 1890 census count were a triumph for Hollerith. In just 6 weeks, the population count of 62,622,250 was tallied. Hollerith became the talk of the scientific community. He rented an office and set himself up in business. He called his new enterprise the Tabulating Machine Company. Hollerith had the Census Bureau business in his pocket, and the future looked bright. But it turned out to be harder than it seemed. Hollerith's natural aptitude for mechanical devices was obvious, but he also proved himself to be a dogged businessman. He drummed up business among one of the biggest industries of the day, the railroads. With the increase in population and the push west, the railroads had grown into enormous organizations, with personnel, stations, cars, and customers scattered all across the country. Hundreds of clerks produced tons of paper to help track and manage these vast empires. Hollerith convinced the New York Central Railroad to try out some of his machines. The experiment wasn't a success. Hollerith's machines could compute fast enough for census work, but couldn't keep up with the speed and volume of the railroad business. After 3 months, the machines were removed. Hollerith was short on capital and faced ruin. He moved his family into his mother-in-law's house. He sold his assets, even his horse, to raise money to redesign his machines to to improve their speed, reliability, and ability to make additions. Hollerith even customized the punch cards for business computations, such as adding columns to store dollars and cents. After a solid year of tedious work, Hollerith returned to New York Central and offered them free use of his new improved and faster computing machines for a year. Within 3 months, the railroad was convinced and contracted to lease the machines. The tabulating machine company was back on track. Hollerith had avoided bankruptcy and now had more work than he could handle.
And Hollerith, you could say, came along just in time. It was a combination of his invention making this available, but also the need out there required something like that. So it was a convergence of the social needs or the social factors on the one hand, and the inventiveness sort of pushing from the other hand.
But Hollerith was weary. He was diagnosed with a bad heart and ordered to slow down. In 1911, Hollerith sold his shares in the tabulating machine company for over $1 million. Hollerith's former company was merged with 3 others and, led by master salesman Thomas Watson, grew into a major supplier of business equipment. In 1924, Watson renamed the enterprise International Business Machines, IBM. Because of Hollerith, the name IBM would become synonymous with computers. By the 1930s, as America limped out of the Great Depression, companies like Burroughs and IBM foresaw continued growth and success. Over the next decade, progress would be slow. It would take the destructive forces of World War II to give the computer its next great advance. Herman Hollerith remarked, "I will have in future years the satisfaction of being the first statistical engineer." He also had the satisfaction of becoming the first computer millionaire.
Can you direct your attention to the screen, please? Welcome to Regular Ass Dinosaur Park! Where the fuck I hide?
Then I'll kill bullets.
That's a great idea!
It's Mr. Karamo, but you already knew that. Both of you are deciding to be Gammon and not here. If you want real people, real drama, and real love, there's a lot of love in this family, so don't destroy it. Watch Confess by Nosy. Stream full episodes of The Karamo Show. It is the truth. We're not going to play these games. And much, much more. Trust me, I know crazy. You are not. Watch Confess by Nosy. Streaming now on the Roku channel.
What's your relationship with Cherry Pie? Long-standing. Yes! Keep going. We don't need to see what you can see now. 5, 6, 7, 8. What do you think happens when you die? I think it's this. Yeah. Trash raccoon. Raccoon. You're a little raccoon roaming around the kitchen.
Dude, look at that. I feel the muscles just building right there. Look at it.
So who plays you in the biopic?
Not a one, because I don't think anybody can hold a candle to the man himself.
That's what's up. That's called confidence.
The Blackbird was someone who slays at night.
Hell of a time to call me back.
Start calling names. We need help. Why did you bring the Black Fist through?
Oh, Black ones.
So what are you saying?
You're all our prisoners. And from this point forwards, this is our outpost.
Throughout history, humans have tried to tame the forces of nature. And new technology is taking this quest to a whole new level.
You don't really know what you're walking into, except you know it's dangerous.
Fighting the hottest fires. Surviving the coldest temperatures.
For the first time in history, we have the solution to hypothermia.
With modern innovations by the History Channel, we're pushing further into the most extreme conditions on Earth. Modern innovations by the History Channel.
The Victorinox Corporation has been producing the multi-function spring-loaded Swiss Army knife since 1891. It was invented by the company's founder, Carl Elsener, from the cutlery background. factory he operated out of this house in Ibach, Switzerland. And Elsener did, in fact, invent the knife for the Swiss Army.
A couple of years ago, I was buying a Swiss Army knife for one of my kids for Christmas, and suddenly when I'm at the cash register, I look at this thing and I realize the Swiss are neutral. What's a Swiss Army? So I actually went home and called the Swiss embassy. And they told me, yes, they do have an army. It's for defensive purposes only.
Today, the knife is still used by not only the Swiss Army, but as standard equipment for space shuttle crews. In the 1950s, it even played a role in the Cold War.
One of my favorite stories about the Swiss Army knife is when Francis Gary Powers and the U-2 plane was shot down over Russia, and Russia, of course, was our mortal enemy, and they trotted him out in front of the cameras, and one of the things they showed was a Swiss Army knife, and they labeled it CIA approved.
World War II spurred the development of the true computer, and in the turbulent days before the German blitzkrieg smashed Poland, a young Polish engineer walked into the British embassy in Warsaw and made an astounding proposition. He offered to sell the British the secret to the unbreakable German code machine, the Enigma. The British desperately wanted to crack the Enigma machine used by German commanders to encrypt their most secret military radio messages. British intelligence supplied the engineer with a fake diplomatic passport and smuggled him out of Warsaw. While guarded by French agents in Paris, the engineer provided details on the code machine's ingenious operation. In the Enigma, plugs were rearranged to conform to that day's codebook combination. The power of Enigma was that this plug arrangement constantly varied how letters were coded throughout a transmission. The number of letter variations was astronomical, so high the Germans considered their code machine to be unbreakable. But the British now knew how the machine worked. They realized that they could very quickly try different key combinations on a small part of the code. Then, when that small part was broken and the key revealed, the rest could be decoded effortlessly. North of London, at a secret installation in Bletchley Park, British codebreakers built a computer-like machine to do just that. Colossus. Colossus used over 2,000 vacuum tubes to process 25,000 characters per second. Colossus could only do one job, but it could compute very quickly. Its deciphered German transmissions were called the ultra-secret, the most closely guarded secret of the war. While the British were now able to read German messages, the question was how to take advantage of the secrets without tipping off the Germans that their code had been compromised. The most senior Allied commanders were privy to ultra material, but had to exercise caution in reacting to it, so as not to tip their hand. Ultra information was never revealed to anyone in a position to be captured by the enemy. Field commanders often went into battle lacking information on the enemy that was known to their superiors from ultra dispatches. This secrecy may have also kept Colossus from prominence in the history of computers. While Colossus was breaking German codes, across the Atlantic another computational device was under construction. The machine which would directly influence the design of all future computers was being built in Philadelphia. In response to the attack on Pearl Harbor, American industry quickly became a powerhouse producer of the implements of war. But by 1943, there was a critical shortage of a surprising component of the war machine: firing tables for artillery pieces. Firing tables allowed gunners to correctly aim their guns at different ranges, altitudes, temperatures, and wind conditions.
To calculate these tables required enormous numbers of calculations, which at that time were done by human beings. Incidentally, these people who did them were called computers. That was their job title. And they operated adding machines, mechanical adding machines primarily. And they would simply step through these calculations and produce these tables.
One of the centers of firing table calculation was at the Moore School of Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Midway through the war, it became clear that the tables could not be produced fast enough. This was a crisis. Without tables, new guns could not be shipped to the troops overseas. To break the bottleneck, a Moore School physicist, John Mauchly, made a fantastic proposal. He suggested that he could build a giant electronic computer that would be able to figure a single trajectory in 100 seconds. The Army, desperate for a device to help them win the war, reluctantly committed to the proposed cost of $500,000. Mauchly and a brilliant graduate student in electrical engineering, Presper Eckert, set to work constructing ENIAC, the electronic numeric integrator and computer. Driven by the knowledge that friends and relatives were dying in battle while they worked in Philadelphia, the team of young engineers toiled incessantly. But could they create such a monster?
Everything had to be invented from square one. And then they had to build it, and then they had to test it, and they had to put it all together and make it work reliably. And then they had to learn how to program it.
Nothing close to ENIAC had ever been conceived. Nearly 100 feet long and weighing 30 tons, it contained almost 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, 6,000 switches, and 18,000 delicate vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes burn out just like light bulbs. In a machine that contained 18,000 vacuum tubes, it was likely that at least one would always be burned out, crippling the machine. Presper Eckert found the key to making ENIAC function. He had the vacuum tubes built to high tolerance. He critically tested them, and then he ran them at low power.
If you took these measures, you might be able to get the machine to work for 10 minutes, half an hour at a time. Since the machine calculated so quickly, you can get a lot of work done in a half hour. And so that's what happened.
After 2 years of intense work, ENIAC was complete a few months after the Japanese surrender. Although it wasn't finished in time to help win the war, ENIAC was a marvelous machine. Huge and hot, it could perform up to 5,000 additions, 357 multiplications, and 38 divisions every second. By far and away the most complex machine of its time, ENIAC still lacked many of the qualities of a modern computer. Its memory was very primitive. It had to be laboriously rewired each time it was programmed, and couldn't make logical decisions based on its calculations. But with tremendous expenditures of time and money, ENIAC had proved that computers could be constructed. However, except for arcane scientific calculation, did anyone really want them? The question lingered. Could anyone build a really practical computer? During development of the Mark II computer in 1945, a relay inside the computer failed, and researchers found a dead moth inside. This is the origin of the computer terms bug and debugging.
Can you direct your attention to the screen, please?
Welcome to Regular Ass Dinosaur Park!
Indie animated comedy. Search Animation Plus, the new home of animated comedy. This is insane.
Go, go! No!
Step inside Stingray Cozy Cafe, where inviting coffee house scenes meet down-tempo lo-fi beats. Tune in to Stingray Cozy Cafe and savor the vibes.
Wow! This is incredible!
It's gorgeously gorgeous. Oh my word. Look at that.
Welcome to a new season of Martha Cooks. Delicious food, delightful guests, and lots of fun. Good food, good friends, and good times. Bon appetit. Watch free on the History Channel.
Everybody struggled last year.
Hopefully we can recover.
Every bluefin is as good as gold.
How would you like us to be remembered?
For blowing crap up.
That seems about right. Modern Innovations by the History Channel. Your 24/7 home for modern marvels, Project Impossible, and more.
This is stuff of childhood dreams.
Modern Innovations by the History Channel.
Just before the end of the Second World War, an advisor to the ENIAC project, John von Neumann, wrote a paper that was to greatly affect the next stage of computer design. Von Neumann possessed a photographic memory, an incomparably fast mind, and was one of the principal scientists involved in the Manhattan Project, the building of the atomic bomb. He was also an advisor on ENIAC. The paper von Neumann wrote after the war delineated the structure of a modern computer. The paper drew heavily on the work building the ENIAC, yet was undeniably augmented by von Neumann's brilliance. Von Neumann's computer was to have a processing unit, a controlling unit, memory, input and output, but most importantly, in the evolution of computers, it would hold its programming internally in its memory. Internally held programs give computers their power and versatility, because an internal program can modify what it does based on data or the results of computations. In machines like the ENIAC, programming had been hardwired or fixed, so the machine was much less adaptable. The idea for storing the program internally was the last key to developing the true computer. But whether it was von Neumann's idea has long been hotly debated. Eckert and Mauchly claimed they formulated internal programs as a natural part of their work building ENIAC, although they couldn't stop and incorporate the idea into the machine. But many who read the paper assumed that all the genius behind it was from the great von Neumann.
He was one of the most widely regarded mathematicians in the world. Eckert and Mauchly were relatively obscure. Eckert was a young man just out of school. Mauchly had been a professor at a fairly out-of-the-way college. They didn't have international reputation.
Eckert and Mauchly weren't included as authors in the paper. They felt they had been betrayed. The most important effect of von Neumann's paper was to spur computer development. Eckert and Mauchly moved into offices in Philadelphia, hired a staff, and set up a company that would build a business computer. They called it the UNIVAC. They signed a fixed-cost contract to build a UNIVAC for the Census Bureau, rolled up their sleeves, and went to work. Unfortunately, building UNIVAC turned out to be a monumental undertaking. As they struggled to make UNIVAC real, they also struggled financially and needed to be bailed out by a series of larger companies. They eventually joined forces with Remington Rand, a flourishing typewriter manufacturer. In March of 1951, after 6 years of toil, they finally delivered the first UNIVAC to the Census Bureau. Unlike ENIAC, the UNIVAC was an entire computer system designed for business. UNIVAC could be programmed for a variety of data processing tasks. Compact tape drives held data and results were automatically printed. But even with the backing of Remington Rand, sales remained slow. Very few people understood how useful a computer could be. That perception changed dramatically one night in 1952. In a brilliant public relations move, Remington Rand arranged with CBS to use a UNIVAC on election night to predict the outcome of the presidential race between Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson. Polls said the race was too close to call. No one had ever programmed a computer to make electoral predictions. Eckert and Mauchly's engineers entered their customized algorithms right until airtime. The operators fed in the results of selected eastern precincts, and at 9 p.m. ran their program. UNIVAC predicted a landslide for Eisenhower, but the polls said differently. The operators didn't believe what UNIVAC was telling them and assumed their programming was at fault. Quickly, they reprogrammed the machine to better reflect what the experts predicted. As the night went on, it became clear that Eisenhower would indeed win by a landslide. CBS sheepishly announced they hadn't believed the machines. When all the votes were tallied, UNIVAC's initial prediction was off by less than 1% of the final result. An extraordinary prediction even by today's standards. The power and utility of the computer had been proved. After the success of UNIVAC, various companies began to see a future in computer development. New companies like Burroughs, as well as old giants like General Electric, jumped into the computer business. But most large American businesses were dependent on the data processing systems provided by one company, the office machine monolith, IBM. IBM had no computers. IBM's aging leader, the legendary sales guru Thomas Watson Sr., was not eager to jump into the enormously costly development of computers.
A computer back then contained thousands of vacuum tubes, occupied one or more large rooms, and required a small army of attendants to run. IBM and most other people didn't see how computers could be used in business.
It took Watson's son, Tom Watson Jr., to lead IBM into the computer age. As Watson himself recalls, the move was spurred by IBM's customers who were fed up with bulky punch cards.
I remember particularly Jim Madden, then vice president of the Metropolitan Life, who said, we're going to cancel our IBM just the minute we learn to do this in tapes, because 3 floors of the Metropolitan Life building are used to store the cards of our customers' accounts. And if we keep going the way we will, they'll occupy the whole building. But we were threatened into this progress.
Faced with the prospect of losing customers, Tom Watson Jr. ordered the development of a computer. IBM's famous sales force told their customers a computer would arrive soon. In fact, it was still being planned. Finally, in 1953, IBM unveiled the 701. Although technologically inferior to the UNIVAC, the 701 and other early IBM computers were hits with the customers because they conformed to standard IBM systems and support. IBM saw the future, and it was computers. They redirected corporate efforts to computer development. IBM's efforts paid off, and by the beginning of the 1960s, the company's large mainframe computers dominated the business. But the development of the computer was about to go in an altogether different direction. In 1961, America was trailing Russia in the race for space.
(1961), a year of achievement for Soviet scientists in the race for space. Yuri Gagarin has become the first human to orbit the Earth, and crowds in Moscow's Red Square salute the 27-year-old cosmonaut.
As NASA engineers began planning the lunar mission, they realized a computer as powerful as one currently the size of a room must be on board. The engineers wondered, is such a small computer even possible? The first great breakthrough that would lead to computer miniaturization had already been made on December 23rd, 1947, when 3 scientists at Bell Labs, William Shockley, Walter Brattain, and John Bardeen, invented the transistor. Formed on the semiconductor silicon, the transistor could replace large vacuum tubes in computers. Compared to vacuum tubes, transistors were tiny, required little power, and produced little heat. The breakthrough was sufficiently important that the three inventors of the transistor were awarded the Nobel Prize. A computer that could navigate to the moon and back would require thousands of transistors, and although small, they were not nearly small enough. The next step in miniaturization occurred in 1959, when Robert Noyce and Jack Kilby, engineers for rival transistor manufacturers, independently came up with breakthroughs that led to the same revolutionary idea. An entire network of electronic components, transistors, diodes, capacitors, and resistors, could be incorporated onto a single chip of silicon. The great innovation in electronics was called the integrated circuit. Using integrated circuits, a 10-ounce computer was built that was as powerful as a 30-pound one made of transistors. But integrated circuits had an inherent problem. They were difficult to manufacture and therefore were expensive. But the space race had started just in time to pay for them. In 1969, 5,000 integrated circuits made up the heart of each of two identical computers, one on the lunar orbiter and one on the lander. For their size, these were the most powerful computers on Earth, soon to leave the Earth entirely.
Beautiful, just beautiful. Yeah, now step off the limb, man.
As Neil Armstrong took one small step in the lunar dust, Intel engineer Ted Hawk was making the last great leap in miniaturization, developing an idea that would put an entire computer on a chip of silicon, the microprocessor. The genie would be out of its bottle, beginning the computer revolution and changing the world forever. IBM took the lead in computer sales in 1956 from Remington Rand by selling just 76 computers.
You press 1, the house is closed. Turn every light off. On that one, Mike, break. You better do that. They know that that's what I got paid for you.
True crime all the time. ABC's 2020 is now streaming 24/7.
True murder mystery.
Sex, betrayal, lies.
Bombshell. The greatest true crime stories.
Now streaming in 2022.
Hey, Dr. Phil here, bringing you the best of the best of my daytime series. Did somebody slip up and write stupid on my forehead? I'm Batman. There is no Batman, it's a cartoon character. Right here, on the Dr. Phil Roku Fast Channel.
It's time to restore your zen. Meditation to help you soothing sounds to help you sleep, and easy listening music to promote relaxation. Tune in from the comfort of your home as an unconventional offering. Zen as you with your daily movement.
From engineering disasters, epic fails,
All the time, boom. Chaos.
to mega movies, heaviest lifts,
This means that we'll do it. We only get one chance to do it well.
from ancient ingenuity
Sakara Bird is definitely the first step on the way to the understanding of aerodynamics.
to futuristic intelligence.
This will evolve for generations.
See how exploration of the past powers the technology of the future. Modern Innovations by the History Channel.
Apollo 13, intended as the third lunar landing, has just lost 2 fuel cells and was venting oxygen into space. 200,000 miles from Earth. Soon the second oxygen tank would begin losing pressure. The astronauts would die unless they could precisely align their spacecraft and fire their rocket to slingshot themselves around the moon and back to Earth. Critical to the alignment was Apollo's state-of-the-art guidance computer. A new trajectory was figured. The all-or-nothing rocket firing was made. The Apollo 13 crew miraculously returned to Earth with the help of their small and powerful computer. By the last Apollo mission 2.5 years later, computers as powerful as those on Apollo would be available to everyone. That was because soon before the Apollo 13 flight, an engineer at Intel, Ted Hoff, had come up with an ingenious idea. Hoff had been told to design 12 separate integrated circuits to make a Japanese pocket calculator. He suggested placing the entire processing unit on a chip and programming it just like a computer. Intel developed the idea, and by 1970 they had a working model of a microprocessor.
It was the invention not just of integrated circuits, but of a particular kind of integrated circuit, the microprocessor, that makes today's personal computers possible.
Smaller than a fingernail, a microprocessor contains many of the components of the computer, including a control unit, a clock, and areas where data can be stored and modified. Processing power was about to become very cheap and very compact. In the mid-1970s, two friends, Stephen Wozniak and Steve Jobs, were manufacturing a small computer in a Palo Alto garage.
Steve Jobs was a college dropout, but he was a college dropout with a difference. He was very intelligent, he had a lot of street smarts, he was also extremely ambitious. But perhaps more important than that, he knew the other Steve, Steve Wozniak, had created something exceptional.
Steve Jobs sold his Volkswagen and Stephen Wozniak sold his HP calculator to finance their company that would revolutionize the computer industry. Jobs trekked all over the San Francisco Bay Area to find buyers for the $500 machine, which they called the Apple I. The Apple I was large and unwieldy. Jobs realized they needed a new design for a computer that anyone could use. Wozniak began to build the Apple II. The fate of Apple changed dramatically when in the fall of 1976, a visitor to Wozniak's garage saw the prototype of the Apple II. The visitor was Mike Markkula, who at 32 had retired from Intel, a millionaire. He was so impressed by the Apple II that he joined Apple and put it on a sound business footing. The Apple II was introduced to the public and sales skyrocketed. But in 1978, even with the success of the Apple II, using a computer wasn't easy.
The early Apple computers, as well as all early personal computers, did not have graphical interfaces. They didn't have mice. They had what's known as a command line interface. That is, you typed instructions into the computer, and your instructions appeared as text on the screen.
A simple-to-use computer had been conceived by a computer scientist named Doug Engelbart. He demonstrated his vision in 1968 at the Fall Joint Computer Conference in San Francisco.
I hit W, and say delete word. The arrow moves back and forth to give me feedback.
Wielding a keyboard and a pointing device he called a mouse, Engelbart worked with a computer 30 miles away, linked by microwaves, and demonstrated word processing and hypertext. Many in the audience went home inspired, but one group alone was to fulfill Engelbart's vision. That group was just down the road from San Francisco, at Xerox PARC. In 1970, Xerox dominated the copier industry, but thought the future might be in computers. A young Xerox executive, Robert Taylor, worked with the team to transform the way the computer industry was perceived. As Robert Taylor himself remembers,
the chairman of Xerox at the time, Peter McCullough, made a speech where he said that Xerox was going to become the architecture of information. So I asked his speechwriter not too long after that, what did that mean? Because I had an idea about what it ought to mean, and so did some other people. And the speechwriter said, well, he didn't really know, but it's a ringing phrase. And so I said, well, we're going to make it happen.
Robert Taylor hired many of the country's top computer scientists and challenged them to create an easy-to-use personal computer. The result was the Alto, which incorporated many of the innovations in personal computers we take for granted today, all developed at Xerox PARC. The Alto used a mouse, a graphical interface, built-in networking, and printed on a laser printer. Xerox developed the Star, the commercial model of the Alto, but it never sold well.
Xerox was a large and very successful photocopier company, and it didn't really understand computers, didn't appreciate the brilliance, the originality, and the enormous commercial worth of the computer developments at Xerox PARC.
But Steve Jobs did when he visited Xerox PARC in 1979 and saw the Alto. He returned to Apple and immediately set to work on what would become the Macintosh computer, the first popular personal computer similar to those used today. What made the Macintosh easy to use was its operating system and applications, otherwise known as software. Increasingly, software was dominating the advances made in computers. Bill Gates, the young president of a computing software company, Microsoft, understood the importance of software to the future of computers and parlayed this vision into a vast software empire, making him the richest man in the world. The dream of a machine that could think had come from a mechanical device to an electronic one, where the bits of coded information that ran it were as important, perhaps more important, than the machine that they controlled. This may have been the best evidence that a thinking machine had arrived and could now be placed on your desk. Soon, nearly half the jobs in America would use a computer. Within the decade, microprocessors would be everywhere, incorporated into automobiles, appliances, and scientific instruments, significantly increasing their capability and reliability. Unprecedented fortunes would be made in businesses that hadn't existed a decade before. Education would be transformed forever, as the access to information would be transferred from libraries and universities to your desktop. The Earth would shrink with unprecedented speed as a worldwide communication grid became accessible to anyone with a computer and modem. And even now, the evolution of a thinking machine isn't finished. Computers have already changed the way we live, and they'll change the way we explore our world and other worlds in the 21st century. They will take us to distant galaxies, and they will connect us right here on Earth. Computers will continue to become more interconnected. They will continue to become smaller, faster, cheaper, and software will become more popular. Minds that have yet to be formed will mold this power to create new marvels inconceivable to us today.
Pisa, more dangerous today than ever before. The dream of unlimited nuclear power turns deadly. 3 cosmonauts pay the ultimate price in the space race. The U.S. Air Force meets a tragic end at sea. And NASA loses its way and millions of dollars on a trip to Mars. Now, Engineering Disasters 3 on Modern Marvels. With this building 9 centuries old, began the saga of one of the most visible and enduring engineering disasters the world has ever known. In 1063, construction began on a cathedral in the Italian city of Pisa. It was the largest Romanesque church in Tuscany. The Duomo, as it was known, was the centerpiece of a group of buildings. It included a baptistry and a bell tower. In August of 1171, workers dug the foundation for the tower, which was to soar 183 feet into the sky, the tallest in the region.
At that time, many towns were competing for towers, especially in Italy. There were towers built in Pisa, there were towers built in Bologna and Rome, and each family tried to build one bigger than the next one. Towers at the time were considered to be status symbols.
The first 3 stories, the tall ground story, and the first 2 loggias, or open galleries, were built between 1173 and 1178. The next 4 loggias were added between 1272 and 1278. While adding the next loggias, the builders discovered that the tower's great height and consequent weight of 14,000 tons caused it to sink unevenly into the ground.
The way the tower sits is not perfectly flat and perfectly even, so the high side, or what started off as the high side of the tower, seemed to be on sturdier soil than the low side. The low side kept sinking further and further down.
Undaunted, the builders believed that they could correct the lean by building the 4th story taller on the south side. But the extra weight of the new construction made the tower tilt farther still. By 1298, the tower was leaning more than 4.5 feet. The belfry was added in 1370. By 1550, the tower's lean increased to about 12.5 feet.
Until the early 20th century, very little was known about the properties of soil. It was thought of merely to put your building on the ground and you try to put it on rock. You can't put it on rock, you spread the load out as much as you can.
Flawed as it was, this regional landmark could not be abandoned. In 1911, the Italian government began taking careful measurements each year. Engineers discovered, to their dismay, that the tower was tipping southward at the rate of 1/20th of an inch per year. From the time it was completed in 1370, the tower had leaned more than 13 feet off the vertical. Engineers continued to search for solutions. In 1934, they hit upon the idea of stabilizing the tower's uncertain foundation by drilling 361 holes around the base and injecting 80 tons of grout to firm up the soil. Their efforts were for naught. Rather than strengthening the ground beneath the tower, the holes made the ground less stable, and the tower's lean increased.
The Tower of Pisa is a lesson for engineers and architects, and that is that you have to be very careful what you're building upon, because what you're building on may actually end up being what causes the problem in your structure. That is why today we are very concerned and we explore the soils under a building long before the building is started.
Experts acknowledge that an earthquake, a windstorm, or even a heavy rain might send the tower crashing to earth. It was closed to the public in 1990. A fresh approach was needed, and engineers decided that better data might help them address the city's very public engineering fiasco.
They embarked on the ambitious project of wiring the tower with 120 sensors to monitor its every inclination. They learned that in the late morning, the tower leaned away from the sun to the northwest, as its southeastern side warmed up and expanded. At night, the southeastern side cooled down, and the tower leaned back. By studying the soft clay beneath the foundation, architectural historians determined that the centuries-long delays during construction could provide a clue to setting the tower straight. The delays allowed the clay beneath the tower to settle and become stronger. Without those delays, historians believed the tower would have toppled long ago. This seemed to confirm the idea that the problem lay not with the tower, but with the ground upon which it stood. In June of 1999, engineers discovered a way to steer the tower by changing the soil composition beneath it. 41 drill pipes were arrayed around the north quadrant of the tower. They entered the soil at different points along an arc about 40 feet from the base, at an angle of 30 degrees. Inside each 8-inch diameter pipe was an auger, a corkscrew bit that trapped soil between its blades and channeled it to the surface. The tower settled into the yard-long channels created by the bits.
Perhaps this last attempt will actually prevent the tower from leaning any further.
By the end of summer 1999, the tower had tilted back toward the north by about 1.5 inches at the top. Engineers expect to auger more soil from beneath the tower's high side and return the structure to the 5-degree lean it last saw in the 19th century.
It's clear that once the tower does not lean anymore, the Pisans are not going to want to straighten the tower out, because after all, who would want to see a straight tower in Pisa?
Some estimates put the cost of saving the tower at $7 million. But saviors say it's worth it to have a safer, if not completely straight, Tower of Pisa. The tower's faults have made it one of the world's major tourist attractions. But in the lonely high desert of the American Northwest, there was a vastly different engineering disaster, so terrifying, it was buried beneath the earth. In January 1961, 3 men would die of injuries received here, the site of the world's first peacetime nuclear accident. Splitting the atom revealed all that was great and horrible about human intelligence. It was the final word in settling World War II, a constant threat during the Cold War, and, its proponents believed, a grand opportunity to power the world peacefully. In 1958, the U.S. Army started construction on the SL-1, the Station Low Power Reactor, at the Nuclear Reactor Testing Facility in southeastern Idaho.
It was used as a training site for future deployments of this reactor type. It would take about 6 months for an operator to be fully trained.
The reactor ran without incident for 2.5 years, only shutting down for maintenance over the Christmas holiday. After the new year, a 3-man maintenance crew was assigned to restart the reactor.
The routine of operating and testing a reactor was to operate it for any number of days or weeks, shut it down, train the crew in maintaining the reactor, maintenance tasks, possibly make changes that operated in this fashion while the trainees were certified and given the instruction that they needed.
The core of uranium-235 gave off subatomic particles called neutrons. It was surrounded by water which cooled the system and slowed the neutrons to a rate suitable for fission to occur. Inside the 13-ton reactor vessel, control rods made of boron regulated the fission reaction. The rods absorbed the neutrons produced by the core. Therefore, when the rods were lowered into the core area, and absorbed neutrons, the fission slowed down. When they were raised and the neutrons flowed freely, the fission reaction sped up.
So if you want to regulate the rate at which the neutron reaction is going, you regulate the control rods in the reactors.
At 9 a.m. on January 3rd, 1961, an alarm rang out at the fire station. The trouble spot was designated ARA, Army Reactor Area. It turned out to be a false alarm triggered by a faulty heat detector. The crew working to restart the reactor heard another fire alarm at 4 p.m. Also false. But at 9 p.m., a fateful third alarm signal rang out. 6 Atomic Energy Commission firefighters, an assistant chief, and a security officer rode to the reactor site 12 miles away.
Now it is 17 below zero. They've been out there twice during the day already, and so we're human, and we're disgruntled because we have to get out in the night, and we have to go back out in this cold.
They arrived 9 minutes later to find nothing out of the ordinary. There was no bulky heat indicator this time, and certainly no sign of fire. But once inside the SL-1 building, they saw the flashing indicator of a radiation alarm. The area was compromised. A radioactive leak, or worse. And strangely, the reactor maintenance crew was nowhere to be found, even though their coats hung on the rack, and their lunch pails were in the cafeteria.
That plant was not run with zero heat. Could it have been that when something happened, they took off across the desert, evacuated the plant, and we did not know that?
As the firefighters approached the stairs to the second floor reactor room, they noticed a new disturbing development. The instruments they used to measure radiation pegged at their maximum. The firefighters left the building, but the assistant fire chief, concerned about the maintenance crew, continued on upstairs, alone, to check the reactor room. There he made a grisly discovery, a body motionless on the floor.
We were told that we should not enter the complex again because of the hazard of the high radiation.
A fresh team arrived with robust instruments capable of measuring high radiation levels. Inside the SL-1, their instruments also pegged at their maximum, 500 Roentgens. Typically, a single dose of 600 Roentgens is fatal. Next, a search and rescue team risked their lives to go inside the SL-1 and investigate the disaster. There are 430 operational nuclear reactors worldwide. They provide 16% of the world's electricity.
Say it like you mean it. Victory starts in our thinking. Things are not only about to change, but it's going to be better than you've imagined. You're going to go out of here with more joy today. Sitting outside the gates looking in is not your destiny. You're going to come into a beautiful place.
Hope is that anchor for our soul.
Do I have any believers and not doubters in the room today? I know we do.
Hey, Dr. Phil here with some big news. My best of the best episodes are streaming right here on the Dr. Phil Roku Fest channel. The most unforgettable moments. Did somebody slip up and write stupid on my forehead? With my most memorable guest.
I'm Batman.
There is no Batman. It's a cartoon character. 24/7 streaming, and it's all right here.
You are out of bounds.
And if you're not watching, I've just got to ask, how's that working for you?
Experience proven superior accuracy with AccuWeather Now, your source for 24/7 forecasts. Start your day prepared with AccuWeather early. Get forecasts with greater detail and localization, and stay ahead of severe weather with our advanced alerts that help you prepare better for what's coming. Experience proven superior accuracy. Watch daily and stay prepared
with the AccuWeather Now Roku channel.
Great guests, great stories, and some of my favorite people.
Incredibly good. Let her watch it. Decide for themselves.
How do you know that? Because we've done research.
Best of our time.
Join me on the Grand North Show channel for non-stop classic North.
Get ready to take the plunge, dig deeper, and fly higher than ever. With modern innovations by the History Channel. Your 24/7 home for modern marvels, Project Impossible, and more.
This is stuff of childhood dreams.
Celebrating the men and women who make history by pushing the limits of human innovation.
Nothing's impossible. If you put your mind to it, you can build it.
Modern Innovations by the History Channel. In January 1961, the world's first peacetime nuclear accident presented troubling issues for the U.S. Army. The entire reactor was a hot zone. At 10:30 p.m., 5 technicians in full protective gear entered the contaminated area. Each man carried at least one film badge, which recorded his radiation exposure. Just as photographic film reacts to light energy, it is also affected by radioactive energy. The badges were examined to be sure no man received a radiation dose beyond the acceptable limit. A technician called a health physicist was on site to watch over the process. Because of the extreme health risk, he allowed each team of rescue workers in the reactor room for only 1 minute.
Someone told me he had a big metal wrench of some kind, and when your minute was up, you'd bang on the wall, and you'd rush out of there with your 1 minute of work done.
The men inside the reactor building presented their own radiation hazards, and technicians took special precautions when handling them to prevent the spread of contamination. One victim who was clinging to life was transported to a remote desert location for a medical exam.
The site doctor immediately responded out across the desert. It probably took him half an hour to get there. This is quite a driving distance. The doctor checked him over and then declared he had expired. If we don't want to spread contamination all over the desert, the ambulance sat there for quite a while until they decided for sure what they wanted to do at that point.
Later that night, the last man inside was found in an improbable place. No one had seen him because he was pinned to the ceiling of the reactor room, impaled by a control rod.
Photographer was given permission to suit up, go in and take photographs because they had to figure out how they were going to remove the body the third man pinned up on the ceiling. They didn't know whether the reactor was stable or not. They didn't know if it could go critical again. They certainly didn't want anything falling into one of those openings.
Technicians made a sling to lift him out without disturbing the sensitive hot zone.
It would be hard to recover the idea of how much shock was produced. The entire history of the Atomic Energy Commission, 16 years, had never generated an accident like this. I mean, it was unprecedented.
General Electric, experienced in nuclear decontamination, was privately contracted to dismantle and secure the site. As spring 1961 turned to summer, the reactor building was broken down piece by piece. Some sections of the SL-1 were buried nearby after passing a radiation check. Others, which could have held the secret to the disaster, were transported 40 miles in sealed vehicles to a facility called the Hot Shop. There, they would undergo decontamination and analysis. This painstaking work continued for 11 months. Then, finally, a crane lifted the entire reactor vessel from the gutted building and loaded it onto a vehicle for transport to the hot shop. The difficult job of dismantling the reactor was complete, but the real work was just beginning. In the hot shop, the reactor vessel was picked over for clues. Analyzing scratch marks along it, investigators determined that uncontrolled nuclear fission, called an excursion, generated great heat, causing water surrounding the core to turn into high-pressure steam. This pressurized steam launched the reactor vessel upward like a rocket.
It all happened so fast that the steam forced the water up, hit the top of the reactor, 10,000 pounds per square inch. Terrific force. And the reactor actually jumped 9 feet into the air and was stopped by the ceiling of the room it was in.
There are no survivors of this accident. There was no testimony, no witnesses. But the evidence found that this central control rod had indeed been moved up to 20 inches. That was a design flaw.
Investigators believed that the reactor went critical because one of its control rods was pulled out past the safe limit of 4.2 inches. Since the control rods regulate the fission reaction, removing one or more would cause the nuclear reaction to accelerate out of control. What remained a mystery was why a trained worker would pull the rod out so far, knowing full well the dire consequences of doing so. Theories abounded. Most convincing was that the control rod simply stuck in its housing. It required so much force to move that it was inadvertently jerked upward. SL1 plant records show that indeed the rods had a history of sticking, and at times were difficult to relocate, even during the simple maintenance the crew was attempting to perform.
This business of having stuck control rods the previous month or two never should have been permitted to go on unless an explanation had been found for that. Something had been lacking in the attention to detail on safe operation of this reactor.
The investigation complete, the SL1 program was scrapped, and the Atomic Energy Commission was plunged into a morass of official accusation, investigation, and self-examination.
They wanted the rest of the laboratories to learn from this. Some of the things they learned were applied after the 3 Mile Island accident. Cleanup methods, management of equipment, management of people, protection of people. The people at this site made it their business to consider this matter, and so they designed certain techniques and tools and procedures should it ever happen again. Thank God it hasn't.
Since the SL1, no reactor has been designed to go critical when the central control rod is removed. All human interaction has been eliminated. Computer-controlled mechanisms move the rods, and they cannot be pulled past the critical point at any time. While the nuclear power industry worked hard to address the technical issues brought up by the SL1 disaster, the psychological damage had been done, and the promise of nuclear power would never shine as brightly again. Next, the defenders of the free world build a radar tower that proves to be a greater enemy than the Soviets. Technicians who worked on the SL1 cleanup became sought-after experts. After the 3 Mile Island accident, the Idaho facility that was home to the SL1 received 330,000 pounds of the 3 Mile Island plant's nuclear fuel and radioactive materials for safekeeping.
We 3 women who have come to Rome to star in their very own romantic comedy. I feel like I'm in the Lady of the Tramp. This is a real-life fairy tale.
Please believe.
You're watching
Gusto TV. Gusto TV.
You ready? The world's best food channel. It's a flavor explosion. You're gonna love it.
Whoa! Holy cow!
And it's all on Gusto TV.
When it comes to big personalities, Dr. Phil's Merit TV has the biggest and the best. Steve Harvey.
Before you get the man cave, just get your man corner. Get that corner and be happy.
Nancy Grace.
You'd have to be under a rock in a cave on the other side of the world not to know about that.
himself, Dr. Phil.
Well, hello.
Your ear just fell off.
It's the best of Dr. Phil's Merrick TV on Roku.
You don't need to be a movie buff to love Cinevault classics. You just need to love movies.
This is a trick, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the best part of it. Cinevault classics. Calling all Tyler Perry fans. For the family. Come on. Oh, hell no. If you want your favorite hit comedies in one place, 24/7. It's going down faster than a football player and a strip club. BET Tyler Perry comedy without the pain and assistance with every day and night. All the laughs, all the heart. Wow. All the time. Okay, I like that. BET Tyler Perry comedy. When it comes to innovation, size does matter.
This is going to be like the eighth wonder of the world.
Whether it's engineering wonders that rise to the heavens, or revolutionary tech that fits on a fingertip, today's innovations range from titanic triumphs to miniature marvels.
Get outside your comfort zone. It's amazing what you find outside your comfort zone.
Modern innovations by the History Channel. Tomorrow's tech in all its shapes and sizes.
In 1954, the U.S. government was carefully monitoring a disturbing buildup of Soviet military might. In the days before the intercontinental ballistic missile, long-range Soviet bombers had America in their crosshairs. American fighter jets were an effective countermeasure, but their radar range was only 15 miles. Therefore, the U.S. military set up a radar early warning system to detect any aircraft that entered American airspace. At the farthest reaches of the defensive line were RC-121 reconnaissance aircraft. Next were radar-equipped seagoing vessels called picket ships. Any report of enemy contact was to be radioed to the next planned link in the defensive chain. A group of 5 offshore radar installations. These artificial islands were called Texas Towers because of their design similarities to oil rigs off the coast of Texas. Of the planned quintet, 3 towers were built from 1957 until 1960. Tower 2 was constructed with its legs attached to the radar platform and floated to its position 110 miles off the coast of Massachusetts in 56 feet of water. Tower 3, constructed similarly, was positioned nearby in 80 feet of water. Tower 4, to be placed 78 miles off the coast of New Jersey, was to be in the deepest water, 185 feet.
Tower 2 and 3 were built with 15 legs. They had 3 permanent and 12 that they jettisoned off after they had it up. Tower 4 went out with 2 legs in the water and 1 above, all braced together on pontoon.
Perhaps because it had longer legs than the others, Tower 4 was constructed differently. The leg assembly, seen here as it was floated separately from the lower platform, encountered rough weather on the 360-mile trip from the North Portland, Maine shipyard, where it was built. On the way to its position off the coast of New Jersey, at least 2 braces fell from the legs, weakening the structure. Though the Air Force brass were aware of the damage, they elected to make repairs after the legs were connected to the base.
I think the mistake was they repaired it after it was up. I think that was the most critical time for that tower.
After 9 months under construction, the bill for Tower 4 came to $21 million. It was big enough for a 6-story building to fit below its triangular steel platform. The Air Force assigned 70 men to serve on the tower. A mix of military radar technicians and civilians who maintained and repaired the massive man-made island.
My dad got a job as a welder on tower number 4. I was a refueler.
Don Abbott refueled Boeing H-21 helicopters for the trip out to Tower 4. His father, David, was often a passenger. Life was hard and cold aboard the tower, but the the Air Force did its best to make it bearable.
When one crew was working, the other crew was playing. We had pool tables, ping pong tables, and we had fishing, we even had basketball. The only problem was there was only one ball. But if the ball went overboard, they had to go and get it. They did all their cooking on the tower, had fresh rolls every day.
The amenities helped the crew cope with rough conditions. But from day one, Tower 4 shook more violently than the others. And over its next 2 years in service, it was lashed by 2 hurricanes.
I had a plum in my cabin, and I used to watch it go back and forth, or it even turned, gyrates. That was my ticket of knowing what was going on with the tower. They decided that they were going to name it Old Shaky, and that's what they did.
The men who served on Tower 4 knew they were taking a risk. But for Lieutenant Colonel Cutler, safety was a top priority. He notified headquarters about the tower's gyrations.
I sent a letter in saying that we have a problem here. We have to send a crew out here to try to do something with it.
Divers were sent into the water to attach K-braces to the tower legs.
And it didn't last that long, and that didn't do the job. That told me one thing: everything's going backwards, nothing's going forwards, no matter what they did.
By spring of 1960, Lieutenant Colonel Cutler completed his 1-year tour of duty on the tower. He was relieved by a career Navy man, Captain Gordon Phelan. By fall of 1960, the shaking was so severe that most of the men serving on Tower 4 were evacuated, leaving a skeleton crew of 14 servicemen and 14 civilian repairmen. On the evening of January 14, 1961, a severe storm closed in on the tower. By dawn, 55-mile-per-hour winds were beating the ocean into a frenzy.
That day, Mrs. Van, Gordon's wife, had spoken to her husband twice, once around 1 o'clock and the second time at 6 o'clock. During that 1 o'clock conversation, she could hear noises in the background. She asked what that was, and he said, oh, the tower's breaking up. In a macabre type of humor, there was a lot of metal banging against metal. One of the support beams on the leg had broken loose and was just literally swinging back and forth against the leg.
As the storm continued to mount its assault, official indecision reigned. In the Air Force chain of command, no one was certain who had the authority to abandon a tower so critical to America's national defense. By 4 p.m., Captain Phelan took matters into his own hands and called for helicopters to evacuate Tower 4. Seas were so high, no rescue ship could dare approach.
We had a 5,000-ton structure sitting on top of 3 12.5 diameter, thin-walled legs, 67 feet above the surface of the ocean, being slammed by waves higher than a 3-story building, winds gusting over 55 miles an hour. There was no way at that time that you could lower anybody to a ship standing by.
At 7:30 p.m., the tower's glowing image vanished from the radar screens of all ships in the area.
The captain was watching his radar and couldn't believe it. He went to his backup radar unit, checked that, the tower wasn't there. He grabbed the radio and shouted, Tower 4, Tower 4. No response. He flipped over to the emergency broadcast channel. Again, he cried, Tower 4, Tower 4. Nothing but static came back.
At 8 p.m., rescue workers reached the site. They found only debris and heaving seas. Tower 4 was gone. Only one body was eventually recovered, that of Master Sergeant Ronald Mackey. Donald Abbott's father was among the men missing and presumed dead.
The phone rang at our house, and at the same time, we heard a thump at the front door. It was a young fellow delivering the Boston Globe, and they just had it all over the front page. We had no warning whatsoever, and my aunt was on the telephone telling my mom that the tower had collapsed and that all 28 were dead.
I didn't see anything on the tower that was worth losing 28 people. And I say that as a USAF officer.
Congress assailed the Air Force for its mistakes in the design and maintenance of Tower 4. Pin connections were too weak to withstand unpredictable sea conditions. Structural deficiencies in the tower legs should have been addressed before they were magnified by the action of wind and waves.
What they did for Tower 4 had never been done before. This was an engineering milestone. I'm sure it was designed to the best of their knowledge at that time.
Today, Tower 4 is a wreck 185 feet below the surface of the Atlantic. A silent witness to a grave experiment in national defense that went very wrong. On July 14, 1999, divers placed a plaque on Tower 4, honoring the 28 men who gave their lives serving on an artificial island at sea. Next, a triumphant Soviet space mission has an unexpected ending. The last Texas tower was dismantled in 1963, made obsolete by AWACS, the Airborne Warning and Control System.
Spend weeknights with 3 perfect gentlemen. Okay, they may not be gentlemen if you interfere, I'll kill you. But they are perfect. That's right. Weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on Great Entertainment Television.
Let's make some happy little clouds in her world. Get them here. All we do is just sort of have an idea, an environment, just sort of let it happen. And when you're painting, make up little stories. Think about the scene that you're painting. Become part of it. Make friends with a tree.
When the rod bends,
That's a tuna ashore.
pray the line doesn't break.
No, hold on. Everybody struggled last year. Hopefully we can recover from that.
Every blue fin is as good as gold.
I never pictured myself being caught. Torture interrogation center, Al Qaeda prison.
If I knew what I knew now, I would never have gone to Bolivia.
We carried the pot across the border ourselves. Cocaine trafficking.
Drug mules.
Getting kidnapped. It's a decision that I regretted every single day.
Oh my God, she looks like a bride.
Are you saying yes to the dress?
Yes, yes.
You look stunning.
Yeah, this is it.
Wow.
This is my dress.
From engineering disasters, epic fails,
And all of a sudden, boom. Chaos.
to mega movers, heaviest lifts,
This move that we're doing, we only get one chance to do it right.
from ancient ingenuity
Sakara bird is definitely the first step on the way to the understanding of aerodynamics.
to futuristic intelligence.
This will evolve for generations.
See how exploration of the past powers the technology of the future. Modern Innovations by the History Channel.
June 29, 1971, dawned a proud day for the Soviet space program. The 3 cosmonauts of Soyuz 11 had lived in space aboard Salyut 1 for more than 3 weeks. In the Soviet view, it was the crowning achievement of the space race.
Well, this entire era was about the competition in the space race, which was a critical part of the Cold War. It was really about who was the better system. Was it the Soviet communist system or the American capitalist system? And both countries viewed the space program as their crowning achievements, as the pinnacle of their achievements both sociologically and technologically as nations.
At 9:28 p.m. on June 29th, the cosmonauts undocked Soyuz 11 and drifted free from the space station. In accordance with procedure, they changed from full pressure suits into space-saving woolen flight suits.
The cosmonauts, when they got out of the space station,
would leave their suits up there because they couldn't afford the weight. They said, fine, we won't have pressure suits on it. Got a nice pressurized cabin, you don't have to worry about it.
The flawless recovery was tracked by the Soviets as the cosmonauts descended through Earth's atmosphere. Unlike American astronauts who splashed down in the ocean, cosmonauts touched down on land. When recovery crews reached the descent vehicle, they were expecting to greet 3 jubilant heroes. But the cosmonauts were dead. The stunned ground crew attempted artificial respiration, but it was too late. The tragedy was a black mark on the Soviet space program. The mournful march of a state funeral echoed through Red Square. Scientists speculated about what happened and what potential blow it would deal to the future of manned spaceflight.
There were theories that perhaps it was just too long for these cosmonauts to be in space. 24 days is too long. Space is dangerous. Maybe their hearts couldn't take it. These spacecraft are the only thing between these people and the vacuum of space. There were some ideas that some chemicals, some noxious chemicals had leaked out of the spacecraft and poisoned the astronauts.
The Soviet Commission investigating the tragedy reported that a rapid drop in cockpit pressure occurred because of a flaw in the integrity of the cabin seal. As far as NASA was concerned, the initial report only raised more questions. The Americans needed hard information, because in the near future, their astronauts were to occupy a Soviet spacecraft as part of a joint space venture.
American experts really wanted to understand what happened to these 3 cosmonauts. Could it happen to American astronauts? Could the Apollo astronauts suffer a similar fate? And so there were some very high-level contacts between American and Soviet politicians asking for the Soviets to share information, which the Soviets did.
A Soviet-American collaboration uncovered the truth by meticulously reconstructing the final, fatal moments of Soyuz 11. The problem was traced to a design flaw in the way the Soyuz spacecraft separated from the Salyut space station. To send the cosmonauts on their way home, their capsule was freed from the space station when a set of explosive bolts fired one by one. But unfortunately, on the flight of Soyuz 11, the explosive bolts fired all at once. Severe vibrations caused a pressure equalization valve to open. The 3 cosmonauts not only suffocated, but as the air pressure dropped rapidly in the cabin, nitrogen present in their tissues was released, creating gas bubbles. This phenomenon, common to deep-sea divers, is called the bends. Once these bubbles form in the brain, spinal cord, or even peripheral nerves, paralysis and convulsions are the result. And in the cosmonauts' tragic case, they succumbed to a quick and brutal death.
Their blood went hypoxic, which means that, among other things, the nitrogen came out of solution in the blood, and their blood, you could say, essentially boiled. It would be like going from the bottom of the ocean to the surface in a fraction of a second. So their death was extremely rapid and, by all accounts, painless.
Upon completion of the joint Soviet-American investigation, NASA was reassured that since their spacecraft hatch was designed differently, a similar accident could not happen during an Apollo mission. While tragic, the Soyuz 11 mission marked the beginning of a dialogue between Soviet and American scientists that would serve both well in future space station missions. Next, a search for life in outer space has unexpected consequences. The record to date for the longest stay in space is held by cosmonaut Sergei Avdiev, who remained aboard Mir for 742 days.
Life is short. Treat yourself.
Yeah? Jim? You're lucky, man.
heard sillier stuff from my 15-year-old and my 17-year-old, with all due respect to both of you.
I got 20/20 line of vision, and I'm looking right at you.
Watch Judge Nosey today on the Roku channel.
To murder your own mother reflects a particularly callous and different individual.
He was not my brother. He was a monster.
Once you've taken someone, you either kill them or you get caught.
He's just pure evil.
Ready?
Ready.
Feel that energy. I got what you need. Sparkly reconnection. It's physics, but we've got chemistry.
I won't have any trouble like that in front of my wife.
Is this your attempt to be sympathetic, or are you twisting the knife?
Escape.
Get the hell out of my house.
So for Charles, anytime.
I won't have to lift a finger.
24 hours a day. On the General Hospital Channel.
Get ready to take the plunge. Dig deeper. And fly higher than ever. With modern innovations by the History Channel. Your 24/7 home for modern marvels, Project Impossible, and more.
This is stuff of childhood dreams.
Celebrating the men and women who make history by pushing the limits of human innovation.
Nothing's impossible. If you put your mind to it, you can build it.
Modern Innovations by the History Channel.
On December 11, 1998, NASA launched a Delta II rocket with precious payload aboard. The Mars Climate Orbiter was on its way to the Red Planet. Two instruments aboard the spacecraft, the Pressure Infrared Radiometer and the Mars Color Imager, would provide the first detailed data about the Martian atmosphere. The orbiter would remain in Martian orbit for 2 years and function as a relay station for the next planned mission. In this way, NASA would fly 2 smaller, cheaper missions, rather than a single costly mission. It was a 2-for-1 approach that was hailed for its economy and efficiency. NASA engineers had adopted a philosophy they called faster, better, cheaper, believing that it would allow them to fly more missions and spend less. On September 23, 1999, at 2:01 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, the probe was supposed to fire its main engine, pass behind the Red Planet, then enter an orbit 93 miles above the Martian surface. But instead, when it should have re-emerged from behind Mars and re-established radio contact from orbit, there was no radio signal. Scientists later concluded that it went in far too low, only 37 miles above the surface. The cause was a grade school level calculation error, and the effect, an engineering disaster.
What happened was that the engines ended up burning too long, and the spacecraft went too low into the atmosphere, slowed down too much, dived into the atmosphere, and burned up in the atmosphere as far as we could tell.
It was an embarrassing blunder. The spacecraft's builders, Lockheed Martin Astronautics, calculated trajectory and engine thrust using the English system of inches, feet, and pounds. But NASA's navigation team assumed those numbers were metric, millimeters, meters, and newtons. They entered the wrong values into the navigation computer, sending the climate orbiter off course. When the spacecraft entered the Martian atmosphere at 10,000 miles per hour, it was doomed. NASA had to answer for the loss of the $125 million vehicle.
The navigation team came on the program 2 months before the launch. So they were not familiar. They hadn't attended the preliminary design review. They hadn't attended the critical design review. They were really not familiar with the spacecraft.
Although the Mars Climate Orbiter failed, NASA had already committed to its next Mars mission. On December 3, 1999, the $165 million Mars Polar Lander was to touch down on the Martian South Pole. Its mission? A search for water. Scientists hypothesized that water, vital to life as we know it, once flowed across the Martian landscape and could be stored as ice at the pole.
One of the exciting parts of the Mars Polar Lander payload was something called the TIGA, which was the Thermal Evolved Gas Analyzer. There was a robot arm on the lander which would scoop up some soil, put it into the TIGA instrument, and then there was an oven that would heat it up and measure the various components of the gases as they came off. And so it was going to detect not only how much water there was, but maybe the isotopic composition, that is, how many neutrons were there in that particular kind of water.
Still stinging from the Mars orbiter debacle, Jet Propulsion Lab engineers knew the stakes were higher this time. Not only did the Polar Lander cost $40 million more than the Mars orbiter, but landing on Mars was more difficult than orbiting it.
Landing on another planet is probably the most difficult thing we do, and every detail must be right. So we must learn, and we must learn quickly from the loss of Mars Climate Orbiter.
Anxious engineers double-checked their mission plan and made design modifications to the spacecraft.
They indeed discovered that there was a possibility that the rockets wouldn't start properly after having been in the cold of space for a long time. So they did a bunch of tests and verified that indeed if they used certain procedures that they would be fine.
At 12:39 p.m. on December 3rd, NASA was expecting to receive a signal from the Polar Lander. But no signal ever came. The spacecraft was never heard from again. Scientists believe that, like the Climate Orbiter, the Polar Lander crashed on the Martian surface, but this time for a different reason. A software error caused the Polar Lander to deploy its landing legs too early and turn off its engines more than 100 feet from the planet's surface.
And the whole thing crashed. Well, it was definitely a bad missed opportunity because that was their opportunity to get to the South Pole. If there's water anywhere near the surface on Mars, it's at the poles. And so this was going to be the experiment that could really go look for water.
NASA had egg on its face for the second time in as many months. Failure analysis revealed the problem to be the very philosophy of faster, better, cheaper that NASA adopted to streamline its operations.
The philosophy was, well, hey, if we send small missions frequently, then we're spreading the risk. And on top of that, we can take advantage of what we learn with one mission to design another mission. Unfortunately, that works rather well as long as your appetite doesn't exceed your resources.
Following the twin disasters of the Climate Orbiter and Polar Lander, NASA cut back on its missions to Mars. The next mission to search for water on the Red Planet may not come until 2007. Hard lessons came from each of these engineering disasters. When building the tallest tower on land or at sea, exploring interplanetary or subatomic space, engineers and designers went out on a limb and unfortunately found their reach exceeded their grasp. In ambitious projects like these, necessity was the mother of invention, but also midwife to mistakes. Minor errors led to complicated problems and even cost lives. Perhaps an insatiable desire to push to the limit is hardwired into our genetic code, but going to the maximum in extreme situations will always demand its due. They're a cut above. They can split a single hair or slice through almost anything. They can carve through steel or etch it with delicate precision. Watch your fingers. We're cutting to the core of the world's sharpest on Modern Marvels Essentials. The toughest steel, most powerful tools, and cutting-edge technology. All of these are essential parts of creating the world's sharpest things. One of the most handy slices, dices, and chops its way through almost anything edible. Cutco Cutlery in Olean, New York, claims to create the world's sharpest kitchen knives. It all begins with a steel alloy containing chromium, with a perfect balance of strength, edge retention, and corrosion resistance. But having the best steel isn't enough. The metal must undergo a high-tech heat treatment on its way to becoming super sharp.
If we don't go through a proper heat treating process, we've wasted all our money. This is just show you here, this is not heat treated. So here's what we would have if we did not heat treat this blade. It would bend in your home, it would not hold an edge.
In the first step of a three-part process, a conveyor feeds newly stamped blank blades through a furnace, where they're heated to almost 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, they're put in a deep freezer.
Now we're going to freeze it to 120 degrees below zero for about 2 hours at temperature and pull it out.
The intense cold helps harden the steel. But freezing also leaves the new knife fragile.
What you see here on the table is that here's some parts that have been heat treated and frozen, but they're very brittle. If I put this in, you can see here, it broke very easily.
To fix this, another furnace warms the steel again, this time to a balmy 365.
That will give us a tough part. Very much what we see right here in these knives that have been ground and finished, but you can see how they'll flex.
Now that the blank steel has the right consistency, it's time to grind the edges. Each blank passes through an automatic grinder, which tapers its edge to just 18 thousandths of an inch thick. This is only about 5 times as thick as a sheet of paper. But ultimately, it's manual grinding that turns these knives into the world's sharpest. Operators press each blade, one side at a time, along a powered conveyor belt that acts like